Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of TV and Us, a conversation show about the TV series we just can't stop talking about. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And each season, we focus on a different show, reviewing it episode by episode, and we invite you to watch along with us. Right now, we are reviewing The Bear Season 2, and today we are on episode 6, titled Fishes. If you haven't watched it yet, this is your spoiler. Please check it out before continuing to listen to the rest of this episode. All right, Sarah, let's dive right in. Start us off with an IMDb summary for episode 6.
Flashback to an intense and heated Christmas dinner in the Berzato family.
Nice. Yes. All of those adjectives are very accurate.
It is both intense and heated.
Yes.
Yes.
In every possible way. Okay, let's start off with our episode titles of choice for episode 6. What is yours?
Mine is Merry Christmas.
Nice. Very merry indeed. My episode title is Leopard.
Nice. Yes. Yeah. It's quite the decor choice.
It is the Donna energy through and through. All right. Man, this is going to be an interesting discussion. I honestly don't even know where to begin, but let's maybe start with our high-level thoughts, reactions, experiences watching this episode. And I think I'm particularly keen to hear your thoughts about this because I think the first time watching this episode, it's, pure experience and shock value and all of the stress, all of the heart pumping thrill of it. But on a second watch, I'm so intrigued all of the maybe little things that maybe you picked up on the second time around. Or maybe you were just like, I'm also just stressed all over again. So you know what? It's dove right back into the experience of this episode. I'm curious your thoughts on episode 6.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting watching it again because you obviously know where the episode is ending up. And I think this time I was much more focused on those moments of calm and peace that we get in this episode. Whereas the first time I was just way too stressed the entire time to even really register those moments, I think. So upon second watch, I was really appreciating the pacing and the structure of this episode to give us those moments of respite, to give us those moments of, levity with the facts or with these random little stories that we're getting throughout, just to give us a break from the madness. But then at the same time, in those lulls, you still have that impending sense of another wave of chaos is coming. And so the way that those moments function as a way for you to breathe, but also set up kind of this sense of impending doom is really fascinating. So it makes me appreciate this episode even more, just how it's paced and how it's structured, because it is a lot. You go through so much in this episode. And at the same time, it's revealing so much about Carmy and Sugar and Mikey that we didn't maybe know before, and even helping to frame Fack and Richie in a new light as well. Yeah. So I think it's a really good character building episode, while also just one of the most intense episodes for you to experience. So just I don't necessarily enjoy the process of watching this episode, but I am very impressed by how it's structured.
Yeah. Man, I was speechless after watching this episode. I feel like there's obviously the experience of watching it and the stress and the intensity and all of that stuff. But there's so many character moments that the episode wrapped up. My mind was reeling. My thoughts are running in 10 million different directions. And I'm like, this will be a really interesting episode for us to talk about because there's so many character defining moments and even throwaway little lines, little moments that all feel so significant. So it almost feels like someone pouring jelly beans out from a jar and I'm trying to catch all of them and they're like falling in 10 million different directions because there's so much goodness and so much meat in this episode. Um, I I'm impressed at its ability to hold that intensity and continue to build on it over the course of an hour and 6 minutes. This obviously I'm sure is compared a lot to episode 7 in season 1, which is also a very intense, very stressful episode. But I find that they're different in nature. Like the episode 7, penultimate episode of season 1, felt like a short period of time where there's a pressure cooker of emotions and stress that build and explode quickly, and we are staying within that one place, that one moment. What I'm impressed with this episode, and the show is just so genius in this way, but it's building on that intensity by having these seeds. Again, I feel like we talk about seeds a million and one times in our conversations about the bear, but it's just so smartly written that you just can't help but see the way that there's seeds that are planted so early in the beginning of this episode and throughout the episode that by the time we get to dinner, you see the way that all of that collides and comes to a head. And none of it feels like it's out of the blue because it's been compounding over the course of this episode. So I think the most obvious one is the tension between Mikey and Uncle Lee. Like all of that is actually seeded way earlier on in the episode as they kind of butt heads a little bit in a side conversation. And it really comes to a head when everybody comes to sit at dinner. It's also neat, I think, in this episode, particularly to see the way that the characters that we thought that we knew show different sides of them based on different contexts that they're in different family dynamics that they find themselves in. So we see Carmi really just retreat in a lot of ways because there's so many big personalities that his coping and survival mechanism is to just kind of retreat, and he becomes a wallflower in a lot of ways, trying to help, trying to keep the peace, but you see him kind of like shrink a little bit. And then you also get to see the side of him that is in kind of little brother mode with Mikey and Richie, and there's the group dynamic there. And I think it's so fascinating to see the way that all of the characters kind of there's different sides of them that come out based on what conversations that they're in, who they're with, and what subgroups they find themselves in. And it just feels like this kind of representation of what the bear does in general, which is put these different combinations of characters, and we get to see different sides of them come out. So the way that Sydney is with Marcus is different than the way that she interacts with Carmi, right? Like all of that is so fun and fascinating to see. And I think this episode is like a microcosm of the way that the show does that in general for these characters and shows all of their different dimensions.
And I love that we've seen these characters primarily in the kitchen. And that is a very stressful, very heated environment. We've seen them, trying to get the business up, which is very stressful, can have moments of tension and heat. But this episode is completely different. And you start to understand why Carmi and Sugar especially are the way that they are. And growing up in that household, and trying to take care of their mother, trying to manage her mood swings, her alcoholism, all of these things, it starts to make sense why they are the way that they are and why they react the way that they do. And so I think, especially for Carmi's character, we've been learning about him for all of these episodes. We've been seeing him peeling back these layers of who he is and showing these different vulnerable sides of him. And then we see this episode and it's like, oh, okay. A lot of your tendencies, your mannerisms, the way that you cope with stress, it all makes sense now. Like it's not just that you picked up some like unhealthy things in a restaurant, but you were shaped and formed in this type of environment. This type of Christmas was normal for you. And this is just how the house was. And so now we're understanding a little bit more the tension and the stress of coming back to Chicago, because him leaving, going to Copenhagen, then going to New York was almost like a respite for him. And so it's not just, oh, Mikey died, but it's coming back to this place, coming back to who he used to be, coming back to this family after being gone for a while. So I love that without having to say any of those things, the show is able to give us greater insight into who Carmi is. And I think it's also pretty smart to do this kind of in the middle of the season so that it will help provide context for what could be coming next as they're in the final weeks of trying to stand up this business. So just all around impressive episode, but then also within the season, it serves a really important purpose as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it following episode 5, where we get to see growth in Carmi and him expressing more and feeling safe to express more. Like, this feels so significant to come after all of those moments and those ways that he's stepping out into these new aspects of himself that may have been dormant and just shut down for so long, that he's getting to ignite again, like his new relationship and kind of the emotional vulnerability he's willing to show and share with Claire. Like, that feels even more big now, knowing how much his defense mechanism, because he's been in this environment, is to shut down and just go numb. And I think from the beginning of the entire show in season 1, episode 1, where Sugar's encouraging him to express and to reach out and to connect, like, you see so much more understanding for why he is this way, because it's his way to just survive, just to survive the chaos going around him, is to just really numb himself and pour his energy and all of that into something that feels like it's can be controlled, that there's a clear ROI. And he talked about that in, I think, the season finale opening sequence in season 1, around like pouring everything that he had into just his craft, because that felt more controlled. It felt more safe. It felt more clear and linear, and there's an outlet for him. And I think it's neat to see the way that there's that small scene with him and Michelle, where you see the way that Michelle positions and offers New York as an opportunity to really escape all of this. So you're right in your previous comment about how him coming back to Chicago is him coming back to not just this place, but everything that this place means to him. Because we get to see that little moment where New York is positioned as this haven away, where he's able to be disconnected from all of this. So him willing to come back and face and be in this environment again with these people again is huge for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, and I think it's also interesting what we get to learn about Sugar in this as well, and how her and Carmi both respond so differently to the environment. They're both trying to help in certain ways, but that help is received differently because they go about it differently. And then both of them in certain points seem to like shrink back and almost like disassociate,
Yeah.
but they do it differently too. And so I think that also provides some interesting context for Sugar and how she is responding to working with Carmi. But then I think it also provides some really helpful color for her feelings about her pregnancy, like having grown up in this environment and having her mom as an example of a mom. It makes sense that she might be a little apprehensive about being pregnant and kind of unsure how to process it. So I like that as we're seeing more of Sugar, this episode also provides light on this character that might be more of a mystery than some of the others.
Yeah, honestly, I think one of the characters that I feel like this episode is most illuminating around is Sugar. She's a character that we've seen in these group dynamics, and we've seen these other sides to her, but I feel like we get so much insight into how she's wired and the ways that some of those kind of superpowers that she has, honestly, this emotional sensitivity to people is shut down by her mom in a lot of contexts again and again. Like her mom reacts so viscerally to her honestly sensing that and clear and willing to ask like, hey, are you okay? But also it's cool to see how that same uh, act of her trying to reach out and connect and probe is something that like Carmi needed, that like some of the men honestly in her life like needed. Like I love that little moment when Mikey's kind of about to blow up at the dinner table and she says I love
Mm-hmm.
you, like she pauses and it's this moment of tenderness and this care that he needs. But that same approach with her mother just does not go well. And so even those kind of like relational dynamics, it's so fascinating to see that it's the superpower that she has, that she can sense those sensitivities in people and want to reach out and lend that tentacle out to somebody. But with her mother, it touches on a nerve, and so she's confused too.
I love that moment with Sugar and Mikey. It's so tense. Like, oh my gosh, the show's ability to build tension is insane. And everyone is shouting and everyone's trying to take like a different tactic to get Mikey to stop. And it's not until Sugar like says something, and she's almost whispering too, like
Yeah.
she knows that she needs to lower her voice so that everybody else will lower their voices so that she can be heard. And just the way that she is able to control the room and get Mikey to focus on anything else, it's so intense, but it's also showing again how these sibling dynamics operate and how they work together and have to really take care of each other. Oh, it's such an intense moment. It's so good.
It's so good. And what's really beautiful about that moment is that it is such a uh, uh, deconstruction of everything that Uncle Lee was speaking over Mikey in that moment, around him being a nobody, that he is a loser, like all of those like identity things that you see Mikey like receiving in a way that you're like, no, no, especially I think us as the viewers knowing what happens to Mikey later on, you see how much that gets soaked into his sense of self and his sense of self-worth. And I love the way that Sugar, like her I love you, just like pierces through all of that and softens him so much. And you can see how much he melts at that. It's what he longs for, is to believe that he is worthy of love and that he is a somebody and that he is somebody to her. Like I love the way that those two things are juxtaposed together with the power of words and things being spoken to you, and the way that those like fiery arrows from Uncle Lee are combated with these like really tender, warm ways that Sugar expresses to him. And I think it's something too that in this family dynamic that she is uniquely positioned to, in who she is as a person and her relationship with Mikey. She's the person that can do that for him. And I think in a similar way, it's cool to see how you see the way that Carmi kind of has this is able to touch on the soft spot with his mom in a way that none of the other siblings can as well. Like it's kind of this reverse dynamic as well, where for whatever reason there's a softness that Donna is able to show and express a little bit more with Carmi. Maybe he is just able to be this like safer place for her. And she'll lean into it a little bit, but then kind of her walls will go up again, and the tides turn quickly. But there are these like moments of vulnerability that she's willing to show, that Carmi is uniquely positioned to create a space for her, that none of the other siblings are able to do that in the same way. So all of those like relational like special qualities in the relationships within this family is kind of interesting and unique, and they all play a different role in the way they're able to support each other or speak life over each other or get on each other's nerves and really like push their buttons. Those interactions are really fascinating.
Yeah, and this whole episode is just people pushing each other's buttons, really.
Yeah.
And I mean, gosh, it isn't that family though? Like they will know exactly what to say to set you off. Like Mikey is telling these big old stories and Lee just shuts him down of like, we've heard this before. Um, and you just see the little ways that they're getting on each other's nerves. And sometimes it's playful, but then also sometimes it's damaging and toxic. And this whole episode is just kind of floating in and out these different conversations, these different relationships to see what what's gonna light that fuse, you know?
Hmm.
What's gonna make them blow up.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. And on the flip side of that too, you also see these like moments where people are really there for each other too. And I think that balance and that like combination of both of those sides together is really fascinating. Like even those little moments where I think it's Steven, John Mulaney's character, just is able to just give Sugar a hug when she really needed it most, when she was feeling like on edge and wired. Like she just says, can you just hug me? And they have this really sweet
Mhm.
moment of just that the, physically someone being there to hold you that she needed at that moment that John Mulaney's character was able to provide. Or even the like sweet little moment between Uncle Jimmy and Richie too. You know, like this episode is balanced, and I think it actually makes the each of those moments feel more saturated in whatever emotion that they're conveying. Because if this was pure stress for an hour and 6 minutes, I think at a certain point, like we as the viewers also begin to disengage and disassociate, probably from our own like survival mechanisms, but like that wouldn't have been effective either. And so the show knows to give you these like doses of different things, so that when those bigger moments do come, they feel full and meaningful because we've not just been steeped in that for an hour. We've gotten breaks. We've gotten these sweet moments. The sweet moments are more tender because the explosive ones are big. The explosive moments are really dramatic and stressful because we've gotten the time to catch our breath in those little ones as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's the importance of having that contrast because otherwise you don't understand just how explosive some things are because you just kind of get used to it and just check out
Yeah.
almost. Yeah, I loved those little moments of tenderness. Again, it's like they are a family, and so they might be a little bit more intense and explosive, but they still have those moments where they actually genuinely care about each other. But then
Mm-hmm.
they're also going to be the worst to each other sometimes, which is
Yeah.
the interesting thing about family.
Yes. Yeah. No, very much so. Um, and I think one thing that really, oh man, just really sets the tone for this entire episode, and I think is really illuminating for what we talked about earlier around like the way that this family has been like steeped in this environment and shaped how they deal with situations is how much Donna is volatile in that she's swinging between these many moods constantly, and that feeling of anxiety and kind of like that waiting for the other shoe to drop that Carmi mentions. You know, like I think that is a fascinating aspect of who Donna is as a person and how she has created this environment for this family. And I think Jamie Lee Curtis, I mean, gives a stellar performance as Donna, and I think the shifting, constantly shifting winds of her mood. Sometimes she's playful and she's laughing, and but in the next like instant, like almost without even realizing what happened, she is all of a sudden yelling at someone or chewing you out. And I think that volatility um, creates such a source of anxiety. And I think it's really neat to see the way that the show shows these shots of the people in her orbit, specifically Carmi and Sugar. I think get a lot of shots where you see them like observing, and like there's so many shots of their eyes like taking in the scene to try and just latch onto something to understand what to expect next, because the unpredictability of Donna's mood swings, I think, creates so much anxiety for her children. And I think you see the way that they are constantly trying to anticipate when something might snap. And I think that aspect of Donna's character and who she was as like a mother creating an environment for her family is significant. Like she's not just pure like, you know, a loose cannon and constantly in a bad mood. No, there's these moments of playfulness in her too, and that is really unsettling. And I think we got to experience that as the viewers. But imagining these kids growing up in this environment is a different way to understand who these characters are and how they deal with anxiety, stress, the kind of need for the emotional sensitivity and intelligence as pure survival. You know, I think all of that is really fascinating too.
I also find it super interesting that uh, the Berzotto house is where they choose to have Christmas. Like, like Fack and his brother are there. Like, why?
Mm-hmm.
Why would you choose this madness? Or Michelle and Stevie come. Like, why? It's so I think that's also just an interesting thing too, because this doesn't seem to be an unusual Christmas. They're all bracing for impact. It's coming. They all know it. And yet they continue to come back year after year with the craziness, with the instability and the stress and the chaos. And so I think
Yeah.
that is also a really interesting thing to think about, is this is the place where they gather, even though crazy stuff is going to happen. And maybe they come because the crazy stuff will happen and it's, entertaining, but it is an interesting thing to think about that they gather here. And it also, I think, says something about the way that Mikey and then Carmy have created spaces where people can gather and where people want to be. Even
Mm-hmm.
Mikey's restaurant, the Beef, dysfunctional, madness, crazy. He probably had like crazy emotional mood swings too, and the highs and lows were probably really intense, and yet people wanted to be there. And now it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of becoming the same thing with Carmy too. And he has created a space where people do want to be. They want to be part of this project, even with all of the craziness and stress and instability, and they're trying to manage that as much as they can. But I think that this episode kind of helps to illuminate a little bit more about who Mikey was, and then
Yeah.
who maybe Carmy is starting to become, and maybe stepping into that role of bringing people together, that he wasn't used to, because he even says in the beginning of this episode, like, hey Mikey, can you come inside and be you? I don't know how to deal with these people. And now we're
Yeah.
seeing Carmy having to deal with a whole bunch of personalities and a whole bunch of
Mm.
situations that he's maybe not equipped to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's also it's an interesting like echoing of something that he says in his 7-minute monologue at the beginning of the season finale of season one, where he says like Mikey was always really good with people, and he's always viewed himself as not. Like I'm just not. I don't have that like electric energy, the charisma. Like I don't understand people, but you're seeing that he does, and he's like raising people up and elevating them and drawing out their potential in his team and the people that he cares for. He's creating opportunity for Tina. He's helping hone Sydney and for her to strengths to multiply. He's creating opportunity for so his he downplays his ability to connect with people and create these safe places for them. It's cool because I feel like we have seen him do this time and time again, but the character himself still might not see them that way. And I feel like that is so true with how we are as people sometimes. It's like we don't even know the kind of strengths that we have because we just downplay them. And it's when other people can like speak that into our lives and show us those things that are really meaningful. And I think that that's part of Carmi's growth too, is like embracing and recognizing and stepping confidently into these unique superpowers that he has, that he's already operating within, but that he's maybe doesn't fully realize for himself yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that breaking out of those molds that we other
Yeah.
people have either put us in or we have put ourselves in, because like if you're around a really like gregarious, charismatic person all the time and you're not that, then you're like, well, I'm not good with people, and that's fine,
Yeah.
and I am going to build my whole identity around that. But actually understanding that charisma doesn't necessarily equate being good with people, but you can be good with people even if you have a more like introverted personality.
Yes.
And it's going to be really interesting to see if Carmi is able to step more into that. I think especially in the restaurant environment, because the show has
Mm.
already alluded to him and Sydney functioning in systems that weren't super healthy and showed really poor leadership and maybe even some like abusive leadership. And so, are they going to be able to let go of those types of models and their family baggage to really step up
Mm.
and lead in a way that's healthier and is in tune with who they are?
Mm-hmm.
And that is the question.
Yeah.
We will see.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're rooting for them and we see them make progress in that direction. And like I think it's cool because the narrative arcs for these characters and how they develop is up and down. And like our growth as human beings is the same way. Like we take a couple steps forward, two steps back, like the non-linear nature of watching them grow and try new things and lean into these new areas of themselves and kind of fail sometimes too. Like I think we're seeing Carmi do a little bit of that now. Like he's leaning into this new area of himself that has been dormant for so long, this ability to feel again, to express in a very real and raw way. And there's some things that he's leaving behind, and there's some implications for his actions, but it's messy. The growth is messy, and I think we're seeing them all kind of try and lean into how they can be better and show up for themselves and show up for each other too.
We love to see it.
I
We
know.
love to see emotional and character growth.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's cool when the show gives us these moments of flashback to understand a little bit more of like who they were and where they came from and how they're wired and what cloths they're cut from. Like I think it helps make one us more invested in their growth in general because we're like, oh my gosh, we just understand you so much more. But two, when inevitably they do take a couple steps back or take a couple steps to the left or the right in a different direction, we kind of understand a lot more where that comes from. A character that is, I think, that is a fascinating little window into like who he used to be and maybe where he's growing into now is Richie. It's really neat to see this other side of Richie that is um, in his relationship with Tiffany. Like there's this softness and this tenderness in the way that he interacts with her and wants to take care of her. But even his proactiveness, the way he takes initiative to look for a new opportunity to be able to provide for his family and step into that responsibility. And he asks Uncle Jimmy for, is there more opportunities? Like, I believe I have potential. And it's cool that he also articulates and can recognize it himself. Like, I'm good with people. I feel like I'm not using that as much in my current role at the Beef. It's just cool to see that all of that is in him. And I feel like we're getting these like new emergences of that side of Richie that wants more, that wants to grow, that wants to see his potential fully realized in the present. And so it's cool to see the way that the show shows us like all of this is in him and he is potentially going to be able to lean into that a little bit more in the present again and start this new season for him where I think previously season one and a lot of the first half of season two, we find him just kind of like a little bit lost, wondering what his place is, wondering what his purpose is. And it's going to be neat to see how Richie continues to grow as well.
Yeah, this show is so good with Richie, especially because
Yeah.
we've seen moments of him being the worst. And then we have episodes like this, and we see him kind of moving in and out of all of these different situations, these different relational dynamics. We see him really being like tender and kind to Tiffany and having these really like intimate, vulnerable moments with her. We see him laughing and joking with Mikey.
Yeah.
We see him with Uncle Jimmy, and we know that Richie drives Uncle Jimmy up the wall.
Yeah.
And yet we see that Uncle Jimmy is willing to take a chance
Yeah.
on Richie, presumably, or at least invest in him in some way. And so I think it's so smart to not make Richie just an all-out screw up or an all-out jerk. He is a very complex person, and I really appreciate the light that this episode paints Richie in, because I feel like it's different than we've seen of him before, and we've seen little glimpses of all of these things, but in this episode we kind of get to see them all jammed together in one and get a fuller perspective of who Richie is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's so true. And even though we see these great sides of him too, I love that the show is also like, he made the story a little rosier to his wife by saying that Jimmy's already promised him the job when that's not what happened at all. Like, I love that the show still understands like Richie is still Richie. He maybe embellished a little bit on the new promising opportunity that wasn't really locked in at all, but he was just excited and maybe wanted to like make his wife feel proud. And I love that little moment and that little detail as well. Like he's much better and more stable and more soft and tender in this episode, but he's also still Richie.
Honestly, though, like the fact that Richie seems so calm and stable in this episode is wild. Because I feel like most episodes, he's the most chaotic person in the room.
Yeah.
And in this episode, he's chill. Like, he's fine. Not starting anything. He's
Right.
calm. He's just being himself, having a good time, trying to take care of his pregnant wife.
Mm-hmm.
What an impressive accomplishment.
Yes.
To make Richie seem calm and sane and stable.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, for the most part. And then you still see the like chaotic Richie come out when he and Mikey are together, and they're just like this hurricane of chaos together. And the way that they have this special bond too, and the way that their energies like mix with each other, it's really fun to see. But you kind of can understand why they were so close and such buddies. That scene where they're just like absolutely like pushing on Carmi's buttons is so great. It's classic like older brother with his like dickhead friend just shitting on the little brother that's getting so worked up by it too. Like Carmi has no chill. He is giving them everything that they're looking for too. So funny.
Oh my gosh, yes. Those moments were so good. And again, like we haven't seen a lot of Mikey in this show. We've just seen these little glimpses of him. And in this episode, we get a lot of Mikey, and we get to see the good and we get to see the bad. And so we also get to see some of that tension between Carmi and Mikey, which the show has kind of alluded to, but I feel like it's mostly been positive about Mikey. But now in this episode, we're seeing those little things that Mikey would do that would really bother Carmi and kind of highlight that rift in that relationship that Carmi references earlier in the season. And so I think, again, this episode is so good because it recontextualizes things that we already knew about these characters, while also really setting the stage for what could come from these characters and helping us see their growth, and hoping that they will continue on this path of growth rather than regressing back to the dysfunction that they were likely raised in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what's really neat about Carmi's relationship with Mikey is how multifaceted it is as well. I think the show is not interested in playing in the like pure like one color tones. Like they have the sweetness and they also have the tension all at the same time and within the same conversation. Like when Carmi gives him that drawing of the bear and this like vision for a restaurant, it's a really sweet moment. And then like the next moment, Mikey's like shitting on him for like being all fancy and whatnot, and you can tell that all Carmi wants is for his big bro to like acknowledge him and just like bring him under his wing and for them to do this together, and yet that's always denied for him. But there's both. Like there's this really sweet tender moment where they have that really sweet connection, and then immediately it's kind of diffused and we're on to the next moment. And I love that the show is playing in all of those multifaceted dimensions of human relationships, which are really confusing, and we can like have those really sweet moments and also just like feel really unfulfilled in that relationship as well, all at the same time.
Yeah, no one is just one thing.
Yeah,
And
we're so
and
confusing.
for the yeah, what the heck? Why are people so confusing?
Right?
Um and this show has created so many characters that are all so complex. You know,
Yeah.
like we already had a ton of characters with our like principal cast that we're following. And then in this episode, we just throw a bunch more into the mix. And I think that's really fascinating because all of the other, you know, kind of like tertiary characters really highlight what's going on with our principal like three or four that we
Mm.
already knew, and really highlighting those interesting facets that kind of make them who they are, and those contradictions that make them interesting to follow as a person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think what's neat too is that sometimes when you do like multidimensional aspects about a character, like they kind of don't make sense. You know, you're like, I don't understand who this person is anymore, and it's a little bit confusing or it feels incongruent. But all of these many different sides of these characters feel like they make sense. Like, of course, this character would do this, and of course, it's going to be different in this context versus when they're interacting with someone else, where they show a totally different side of themselves. Like, of course, it just feels right, and I think that that is so such a testament to the like the writers of this show and how much they deeply understand how human beings are wired and how there can be all of these multifaceted dimensions that exist within one person, and which of those should exist together versus this kind of may not make sense for this character. It's so good. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then to understand which personalities will really press the buttons of the other, and how this one personality will react that will trigger this other personality maybe in a way that you wouldn't expect. So it's like all a really interesting person, and then you put them in context with other really interesting multifaceted people, and things just become really interesting. And no wonder Christmas dinner becomes so explosive, is because you have all of these really strong personalities, and some of whom are very unhealthy, coming together, and you know, we get some sparks flying.
This is storytelling. We put interesting people with other interesting people, let them collide together, and let them be
Mm-hmm.
interesting
Yeah,
together. That is
honestly,
storytelling to its core.
that's all
Really,
it
though.
is. We got it.
And the key is that those interesting people somehow feel like we can relate to them. And we are also
Yes.
interesting people watching the interesting people. That's all. That's all we're doing here, really. Just watch interesting people on screens do interesting things and reflect on why we are the
Mm-hmm.
way that we are.
Yes, absolutely. That's all it is.
Yes.
And this show is nailing all of that.
Yes. So true. Speaking of multifaceted people, I love that we get to learn more about Fack and this whole other side of him. I feel like he's often been this really wonderful addition to all of the episodes, and just every little moment with him is so endearing and fun and lighthearted. And we've seen, I would say, like mostly one side of him, but this episode specifically shows us this other aspect of him. He's a little bit more frenetic in this episode, more impassioned. I think in most of the times that we've seen him, he's been kind of this like bumbling, sweet character that's just like happy to be here and helping out and whatnot. But we see this like other side of him that's a little bit more fiery. We see his ambition, we see his entrepreneurial side, and it's really neat because there's been so many like fights and conversations and like really fun moments where he's talking to Richie, and Richie's basically like, you're not smart enough to be applying for this job. And it's cool to see that like back, I mean, and his brother. I mean, their little scheme sounds a little sketch to me, but like they've got this like cleverness about them that are they're looking for like opportunity and thinking outside of the box, and they have this like business mindedness that they're trying to lean into. Like there's this whole other dimension to fact that we got to see a lot more of in this episode as well.
That is still consistent with who we've come to know him to be, too. Just maybe toned down a little bit, because he is still, this kind of break. He is these moments of levity and silliness as he's trying to convince everybody to invest in the baseball card scheme via eBay. And so I loved those moments with him and his brother, because they, like this show is so good at doing, is in these moments of tension, and then we can have a little fact moment, and then we can go back to a moment of tension again. And so we're learning more about him and his family, and maybe who he used to be before he ended up where we see him now with the beef, while also still retaining that sense of joy and silliness that we need in a really, really stressful episode like this.
I love the little dance sequence with him and his brother. It was so great. Oh, who
What
is it
I
that's just like filming them too, or like holding the phone for them to be able to
Richie.
reach? Of course, see, of course. Oh, it's
Well,
so
and
good.
what I love about that is that Richie's phone is on the home screen. He's not even recording them. And so he's just
Yes.
pretending like he's recording them, but he's actually not. Which is such a Richie thing to do.
Yeah, yeah. And he's got his little like little things of encouragement, but also just like poking at them, like, "All right, Ted, let's see what you
Mhm.
got next."
Yeah.
Just egging them
Oh,
on.
it's so funny.
Oh, it's so great. All right, other big moments, big observations that we wanted to mention. Time is flying, man. It's crazy. There's so much to talk about. Honestly, when this episode
Oh
ended, I
my
was like,
gosh.
how are we going to talk about this? There's so much. I guess we'll just have to go character by character and something, because there's so much.
Yeah, there's so much. We've barely scratched the surface on my notes, which is insane. Um, I would like to give a shout out to the production team,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because the way that this house is constructed is just top notch. Okay, the plastic covering of the chairs in the furniture, Donna's bedroom, like you mentioned earlier, nailed it. Perfect. This
Mm-hmm.
kitchen in its absolute shambles is
Mm-hmm.
excellent. The way that there is like sauce splattered all over the microwave, and then
The
as we
ceiling.
get further into the cooking experience, the kitchen timers become even more and more stained. The way that Donna's fingernails are bright red and so long, and for most of the episode her hands are covered in food, the way that her makeup smears, just
Yeah.
everything about the productions and the set and the makeup choices is just spot on for who these characters are. Like, you walk into this kitchen and you're like, oh, I know so much about this family just based on this state of this kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's all of those little details that make this feel like a real house that people are really living in, as opposed to just another, just it's just a set where these characters are doing stuff. Like, no, this feels lived in and this feels real.
It also makes us understand why everybody that comes in this kitchen is like, just, do you need help? Like, is there, like, can we make this better?
Yeah.
And she's like, no, no, like, okay, I'm leaving now because I cannot be in this environment any longer. But yeah, I want to give a shout out to the like chunk of eyelash on Jamie Lee Curtis's face as she's
Yes.
having this
Yeah.
conversation with Carmi, and she's clearly like at the edge of a mental breakdown, and just the smeared eyelash clump of her falsie hanging off of her cheekbone is just glorious. It's very much in line with the single crumb on the edge of Carmi's mouth as he like takes a swig of his Coke or his Pepsi in a previous episode. Those little details really add a lot to to really illustrate like the we are not good. We are not good. Uh, the makeup is crazy. And then she wipes it away like a few moments later. I'm like, oh, thank God. That was really
Hmm.
cool of me.
Yeah.
So good.
Uh, Another thing that I really loved about this episode, I'm so stressed while watching this episode, but I love how well constructed it um, is the way that, again, you feel like this is a real family who has so much history. So throughout the episode, as we're kind of going in and out of these different conversations, you get to hear things, but you don't get to know the entire
Yep.
context. So there's like multiple times where you'll enter in a conversation or a story that's like midstream, but you have no idea what they're talking about, or they're referencing something that happened like multiple years ago that everybody else already knows what happened. And I think that that is so smart to have all of these really high context conversations happening, because that's what happens with people who have known each other for so long. And we are the outsider who's just coming in, and we might not know all of the details about the story, but we can sense a lot based on the relational dynamics and the way that the conversations go and the way that these characters interact with each other. So I think that that's really, really smart in helping us understand what the point of these conversations is. Like, we're not trying to learn the backstory of this, but
Mhm.
instead we're trying to get a sense for who these characters are and how they interact with each other. And those high context conversations really help us focus on that.
Yeah, I think the whole opening conversation with Mikey and Sugar and Carmi is like the perfect example of that. They're talking about like this always happens every year. You can't keep doing that. You can't ask her if she's not okay. And we don't really know who's the she is. We can probably assume that it's their mother, but we get the sense of the history too, of like how many times this has happened again and again. And so all of those details we get to collect without being told. We just get to like infer, and that engagement from us as the viewer is really significant for us to just get like sucked into this world. Similarly related to that, I love, I mean, shout out to the stellar sound editing and the sound production design on this episode.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, in general with the bear episodes, but especially this one, there's sometimes like 4 to 5 people talking over each other at the same time. And sometimes it's this cacophonous, just like sound of voices screaming at each other. There's sometimes these little bits of it that we catch that feel significant. And it adds to the atmosphere, but it also adds to this feeling of immersion. And it creates a sense of realism as well. Like I was thinking about that scene with that really tender moment between Carmi and Mikey, and you just hear Donna in the background just like yelling expletives as she's cooking. Like that's what happens. That's what it feels like when you might have this really like calm, silent, quiet moment together, but like chaos is happening like 10 feet away from you in the other room. And so all of that balance of just this chorus of sound, sometimes these little bits that you do catch, these side conversations that are intercutting together, it's all just really, really well done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it makes you feel like you are there. And also just creates that, I don't know, that really disorienting feeling too. You're sitting at home on your couch, and then you're just all of a sudden dropped into this crazy Christmas with all of these people yelling. uh it's wild.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. Man. Okay. Anything else big things that we want to mention before we give out some awards? I'm sure we could talk about this episode
Oh
for a long
gosh,
time.
forever.
Yes.
um yes, there's one other like big thing. It's kind of a fake out that this episode does, kind of midway through, when Donna is just, man, being herself. And she Sugar asks her like if she's okay or something, and Donna basically is like, hey, I need you to go upstairs and get your dad's gun, and I'm gonna make this your problem. um and I both times that I've watched this now, the first time especially, I was like, "Oh no, is a gun about to enter this episode? Is that how this is going to go terribly, terribly wrong?" And so I love that they let you know that there is a gun in the house
Mm,
halfway through the
so
episode.
good.
And so then as you're seeing Donna get more explosive or Mikey get more explosive, it's like, oh no, is somebody going to go for that gun? And this is going to end very, very badly. And it does end in chaos and it does end very explosively, but not in the way that the show had set it up to. And so I think that that's a really good way to like throw a
Mhm.
red herring in the middle of an episode. And it so surprised me the first time I watched it. And it just, that mention of a gun creates
Yeah.
such tension throughout the last half of the episode because you know this is going to escalate and you know somebody's going to explode and you just hope that it doesn't end with that gun and instead ends with a car through the living room,
Right. And
which is
forks. And
still
forks.
very dramatic.
Flaming forks.
But yeah, I thought that that was so smart to set that up and then go a completely different direction.
Yeah, and it happens like early enough in the episode that every time we're in a scene with Donna and she's getting worked up, like I am terrified, my heart is beating. And so you empathize with the characters that are in her orbit, like you are also afraid of where this could go. And I think that what that opening conversation between the siblings also insinuates like this is not unusual. This is not a one off. This is the norm for them. And so that you just really are able to connect with them and uh, feel terrified. And I think you see Sugar's face when that scene happens too, where she's like wired after that. And Stevie's there to give her a hug. But
Mhm.
that happens early enough that every other scene afterwards, the stakes are there immediately. Yeah, it's so good.
As if there wasn't enough tension and stakes
No.
already, you know.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's give out some awards, shall we? The first category is Top Chef. Who is getting this award this week?
I want to give this to Michelle for giving Carmi an out and an opportunity in New York.
Yeah, yeah, so good, and it's so fascinating when she says like, "I see what it does to you when you're here." Like
Yeah.
that. It's clear enough that Carmi understands that she understands without having to like say it for what it is. It's she's so cool. She's a cool dude. Um, I'm giving this award to everyone for surviving the night.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
Oh,
Great
yeah.
choice.
The next category is Achievement in Chaos. What moment or who is getting this award?
I want to give this to everyone for making Richie look calm and sane.
Yes. Oh, that's so good. Well played. I'm giving this award to Donna for buttering the garlic bread with her bare hands.
Mm-hmm. Yep, as one does.
Right. She's also just hugging everybody with her hands like that. And I'm just concerned for their hair, for their clothing, for everything. There's sauce everywhere. And she's like bear hugging everyone. Like, please,
Right?
a towel.
Oh my gosh. I just I I learn so much about myself while watching things because her hands constantly be covered in schmutz, like whatever food item that was. Oh, I was so stressed.
Yep.
I was like, please wash your hands.
Yep.
Your hands are stressing me out.
Yes. Yes. Spiciest line is the next category. Who is getting this award for what line they deliver?
Okay, I want to give this to Stevie when he's talking to the facts and he says, I like seeing you guys every year.
I
I
have
just
the
thought that
same
was so funny.
one. That's so funny.
Yes!
Never heard of before. Yeah. So he says, I love seeing you guys every. You guys always freaking deliver. It's also perfect because it's the style of humor that Mulaney has in general in his stand-up,
Oh,
just this like,
yeah.
snarky, smarmy type of backhanded uh way to engage with the facts. It's great.
Oh,
Nice.
so funny.
Okay.
There were so many good lines in this
There
episode
were.
too.
There really were. There were. But that was a great one. And we clearly agreed. So look at that. Look at that. All right. Looking ahead, what do you have on your list for the next 4 episodes? We've got 4 episodes left of the season, man.
Yeah. Yeah, we have 4 whole episodes. So, now that we know a little bit more about Carmy and Sugar and how they were raised in their family, it's going to be interesting to see how the show moves on from that, and what else the show will show us about these two characters now that we have additional context to who they are. So
Mm-hmm.
what decisions are they going to make, or how are they going to react to things that will make even more sense now that we've seen them in their family Christmas festivities.
Mm-hmm.
And how is the stress of opening this restaurant going to just exacerbate these issues and these conflicts that are already existing between these very strong personalities?
Yes. Yes. No, that's so good. That's so good. Honestly, I wrote my notes for this right after the episode ended, and I just have the words "now what" in all caps for this. I feel like this episode has opened up and unraveled and uncovered so many new dimensions of these characters that I could see them going in so many directions with Sugar, with Carmy, with Richie, with all of these key characters, and then how we're going to go back to our other family and visit and see, is Marcus back? How is Ibra doing? Like, is Tina still continuing to grow? Is she going to hit some roadblocks along the way? Are they going to open this restaurant? Just there's so many like open threads that have been created that I'm just intrigued to see where they're going to lead us to, because I feel like everything's been opened up at this point, and now the question is, where are we going to go with all of these different dimensions? The things have been presented to us. Now what is my 2 words on my bullet point here?
Well, Jen, I have great news for you, because we have a few more episodes to go.
Yeah.
And we're going to watch all of them.
Yes.
So
yes,
your questions will be answered in the coming weeks.
They will indeed. Yeah. And what's cool is that this has happened. This episode is episode 6. And so there's still 4 more episodes. There's plenty of runway for things to go right and go wrong, which is kind of fun. This is not the like penultimate episode. There's so much more ground to cover for these arcs. And I think some of them will rise, some of them will dip and then rise again. I think all of that will be so fun. There's plenty of time and runway for us, which is cool.
Yeah. There's so many different directions this show can go, and there's so many characters that we're following that they can make lots of interesting creative choices. So we're going to have a fun few episodes ahead. I'm excited.
Me too. All right. Well, this was our review and discussion of episode 6 of The Bear Season 2. You can find it available on Hulu to stream. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of TV and Us. Our name sums it up. We're big fans of TV and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories, so everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today as we continued our journey through The Bear Season 2. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune to your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about episode 6. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at tvnspod, or you can email us at tvnspod@gmail.com. We will be back very soon with episode 7. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll talk again soon.